Week 0 is here, and so too the first international edition of College Game Day, Saturday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, 2 in Dublin, and by extension, the first ever international edition of the College Game Day podcast. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel with you in separate rooms from Dublin, the lovely Alex Hotel in the center in the heart of this thriving city, where Pete and I actually ran into each other on the street last night in anticipation of Florida State and Georgia Tech coming up on Saturday afternoon.
Intrepid foreign correspondence, Rece. Just called for duty here to do the best possible football coverage we can. What a charming city, man! I've never been here. I've been here about 24 hours now. What a neat place. Really, just what you hoped it to be, right? The people are awesome. The pubs are prevalent, and Guinness is tasty. And it's been a cool. A lot of Oscar Wilde. If you like Oscar Wilde, this is your place. So it's been a lot of fun to kind of poke around and explore some.
And you got Oscar Wilde. You've got James Joyce, who wrote Ulysses. And I ate in a pub that is referenced in Ulysses, where the protagonist went in for a gorgonzola sandwich and a glass of Burgundy. I instead opted for some lamb stew and a zero alcohol Guinness. I know that makes me a lightweight, but I was not aware of this splitting the G. When I heard about splitting the G, I immediately thought, okay, well, this is some type of defensive line stunt where they're going to double team the guard and try to split the A gap or something like that. But that's not what it is at all, is it?
So I learned about splitting the G yesterday from our intrepid host here, John Anthony, from Anthony Travel, who puts on this game and has put on many games. So splitting the G is on the proper Guinness pint. It says the word Guinness, and it takes 3 gulps and 1 sip to properly split the G. So I'm going to retire 1 for 1 splitting the G. I did it perfectly yesterday. There's photographic evidence I have sent to the College Game Day podcast text chain, and I was proud to put it down. Stanford Steve and Matt Garrett, our fearless leader, and others we were all attempting the G split yesterday, and I feel like I split it perfect, and it feel good about retiring. At Toner's Pub, right off Trinity College, a fine place with some football on TV and a little outdoor space. We had a nice afternoon,
and we did encounter some people on the train. At least one gentleman from Holt who familiar with the Florida State Georgia Tech game coming, not necessarily familiar with the teams or who should come out on top, but familiar that the game was going on. And you see merchandise around the city. And on at least 2 occasions, I know you remember everybody who ever played. You remember St. John Days that played at Georgia Tech?
I do remember that, like, vaguely. Like, the name is unique enough.
I'd never met him before, but we ran into each other first at an Epic Museum and then sitting in a park. And then he and his wife shared a great donut place that we should stop by on the way. Oh. So, it's been a great time, and it's all pointing toward the kickoff of this most anticipated season, as we've dubbed it, perhaps in the history of college football, certainly in the recent history of it. And it's starting with the team that was at the center of a controversy last year, with Florida State being left out of the playoff. Very new Florida State team, lost 13 guys to the pros, and a Georgia Tech team that's, as our good friend Lee Corso, who also spoke to yesterday, who will be joining us later, not on the podcast, but joining us once the season starts. Sneaking around the chicken coop is sort of what the Yellow Jackets are doing. There are some high expectations in some quarters for Georgia Tech, and a second year with Haynes King at quarterback and some of the weapons that they have, and thinking maybe this is the right time to catch Florida State. Early game, new guys from the portal coming in and assuming big roles, meshing everything together. Could this game be a little tighter than perhaps some anticipate? Florida State at last check, double-digit favorite.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really good football game, Rece. And I think it's a Georgia Tech team that has really found its identity under Brent Key, former Georgia Tech offensive lineman. They returned 5 starters on the offensive line. They brought in an offensive guard who was all-league player at Middle Tennessee, who's probably going to start at right guard for them in Keelan Rutledge. And look, Jamal Haynes is one of the best running backs in the ACC. period. Eric Singleton is one of the best wide receivers in the ACC, period. They were not particularly healthy at wide receiver last year after the early part in the season. So, getting some guys back like Chase Lane is only going to help them. They were very much a run identity offense. You would think Haynes King and his development, they'll open things up a little bit and be able to throw the ball. I'm fascinated how this Tech line, which is, part of a key part of their identity, going to go up against Florida State's defensive line, which I have declared, I think on the podcast that you missed, is the best defensive line in college football this year, period. I think all 4 starters could be top 100 picks in the NFL draft. I've had scouts go through there already this summer. Jaws like slackjaw. They really think Florida State's defensive line is one of the most elite units in the country. The next best unit, according to scouts, Texas A&M. Well, we'll see next week. So, I'm really excited. I'm really excited for this game, and I feel like we know a lot about Tech's offense, and I think we're going to have to learn a lot about Florida State's.
Pete, the one thing I agree with you on all counts. The one thing that I think people maybe don't realize is that Georgia Tech was 12th in the country in rushing last year, and they have a lot of their offensive linemen back. Averaged over 200 yards per game rushing. I really think whether Tech stays in this game or whether Florida State dominates it or controls it might be on the other side, because Georgia Tech was woeful in terms of defensive rushing last year. They 131st in the country, gave up 221 yards per game. They gave up explosive runs. And the one thing I think
131, I didn't realize that. That's not great.
And no, it's right at the bottom. And the one thing that Mike Norvell was not as pleased with his tremendous team from a year ago is they didn't run the ball as well as a Mike Norvell offense typically does. I think they averaged about 150 yards per game rushing. That was the lowest for any of his offenses since his first year at Memphis. So there's been a bit of a renewed emphasis, at least in preparations, on the run game. So I think, I think that is where we find out, can Georgia Tech just stop Florida State from running the ball and maybe give their offense a chance to stay in the game against that great Florida State defensive line. If they can keep that defensive line that you're touting so heavily, and rightfully so, from just wrecking the game.
Yeah, and I think we saw last year Lawrence Toafili really come on for Florida State and really in that ACC title game take over the game. And Riddle Williams is obviously there now too. Another one of the highly regarded transfers that Mike Norvell has gotten from Alabama. But I really feel like there's a lot of stars returning on the offensive line, not as many as we sort of became our hobby horse joke of last season. But Darius Washington, left tackle, is a great place to start your offensive identity.
All ACC,
yeah. And then Maurice Smith's played a lot of snaps for them at center. So I do feel like as Florida State eases DJU into this offense, and he was obviously there in the spring. Yeah, I do feel like they're going to. That's how Florida State's going to open the game. Let's see if we can go downhill on Tech and take control of the game and establish it there. But yes, there's certainly a path for dominance for Florida State there. I just think Georgia Tech will come in like a little bit of a gunslinger mentality and give this thing a shot. They were an interesting Jekyll and Hyde team last year, right? They obviously beat Miami in that famous game that Mario Cristobal didn't kneel the ball. They lost to Bowling Green, who's a fine MAC team. So they did tend to play up to competition, though. They gave Georgia a heck of a run. If you remember that last year, they played pretty well against Ole Miss actually too. So I really feel like they're not going to flinch with the amount of veterans they have, and I think it'll be a very good football game on Saturday, Rece.
Florida State's ranked, right?
Yeah,
and this is a setup. Florida State's ranked. That means old Brent Key has him right where he wants him. Brent Key as a head coach, 4-0 against ranked ACC opponents. ACC. So before all the Georgia people say, ACC opponents, ranked conference.
That's an interesting stat.
Brent Key is 4-0.
Is that Marissa Dowling? Is that her fine work?
It typically, yes. Not in this case. I had her verify it though. because I ran across the stat, looked at some things myself, and I did text or actually email Marissa and said, hey, ran across this stat in the offseason, put it in my file. Can you, as we head to Dublin, can you confirm this so somebody doesn't say, hey, wait a second, NC State, was ranked 24, or something. Yeah. And she did confirm it. So, you've got that. And it's really interesting too. 58% of Florida State starts came from transfers. And there are guys that you mentioned that are back. Patrick Payton leaps to mind, as a guy who's coming back, who's going to be a huge star. Fentrell Cypress should be a huge star too. Yet, Florida State's season, once again, is, I think, largely going to be defined in terms of pursuing an ACC championship, pursuing a national championship, by how the transfers play. The two primary transfers, DJ Uiagalelei, a quarterback on offense, and Marvin Jones on defense, the transfer from Georgia's legacy at Florida State. Those are the two guys I think that most people watching Florida State, certainly Seminole fans, but those of us who are watching without a horse in the race, are saying, I want to see those two. And when I see those two, I'm going to see what kind of difference makers, extra difference makers, I guess in the case of Jones, that they have at those positions, and how it might, what it might bode for the upcoming season.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting on Jones. I probably texted with 3 or 4 scouts yesterday, Rece, just kind of get ready for Florida State's personnel for game day stuff. And so Patrick Payton, my favorite stat, I will use this all season long unabashedly. He had 10 PBUs as a D lineman last year, and that's like unheard of, right? That's crazy talk. He's one of the elite defensive players in all college football, period. So I think it's an interesting mix what we're getting now. So 9 of the 10 players Florida State had drafted were transfers. So what you're now getting is, and that's a compliment to Mike Norvell, by the way. That's not like, oh, they needed the portal. Like that,
100%.
That's not. Yeah, that is not like any shade. No, like he came in and the roster was not in great shape. So he had to come in and pick and choose different personnel to fill spots to get them to be an ACC title winner, an undefeated team last season. So the D-line is the perfect example of what's happening with this Florida State roster now, Rece. The Patrick Paytons and the Josh Farmers, the recruits that came early in Norvell's tenure, are growing up before our eyes. Farmer was actually Norvell's first commitment. He's a local kid from just outside Tallahassee. He's the big D tackle. And then you have Daryl Jackson, another local kid who went to Maryland, went to Miami, then came back. The scouts are buzzing about him. One of them said to me, you don't see too many humans walking the earth who look like Daryl Jackson. He's a big old 330-pound defensive tackle. Then you get Marvin Jones on the edge. I would say Marvin Jones for the draft needs to have the production match the potential. But boy, does he look really like it's supposed to look in that. And one bonus thing, you mentioned Fentrell Cypress, the transfer from Virginia, who's great. Don't be surprised if Azareye'h Thomas, the other corner, ends up being one of the first corners off the board. I think he's if he plays up to what he should, he's a top 20 type NFL draft pick. He's a really talented guy who's kind of got all the length and all the tangibles that really have the scouts the scouts buzzing. So I really think this could be, for Adam Fuller, the defensive coordinator, a special. There's the ingredients here for a special defense. Take DJ Lundy, the experienced linebacker, and put him in there. I really think there's some really nice pieces here to keep that legacy high as the offense, which doesn't have any top prospects, to find itself a little bit early.
It's and speaking of Azareye'h Thomas, like Patrick Payton, also 10 PBUs, but it's expected of his position.
Yes,
I guess you're going,
and that's a great. 10 PBUs is an All-American type season for a
really
corner.
Good.
Yeah. So that's.
I wouldn't be surprised too, Pete, in the running game. And I haven't seen any questions of health or anything like that. But in addition to Roydell Williams, who you mentioned from Alabama, they got Jalen Lucas, who's a different type of back, transfer from Indiana. They also have a big, giant freshman called Cam Davis, who, wouldn't be too surprising to some observers to see get in there fairly early too. So you may see a renewed emphasis on the running game there. And very much like me, I was texting with Adam Fuller, talking with him. You connected us earlier in the off season, and we've maintained connection. like me, Adam Fuller is making his first international trip, or at least across the Atlantic. As I've mentioned a couple of times, sort of self-deprecating fashion, back when you could go to Canada with your driver's license, I had done that. Adam hadn't even done that. So this is his first international voyage too.
I mean, Adam Fuller's got a chance to be right in that Broyles conversation this year. They've built a heck of a defense there at Florida State, Rece.
And another storyline that many here in Dublin will be following, oddly enough, perhaps it's the affinity for Europeans in their football to watch the ball actually kicked, is David Shanahan, the Georgia Tech punter, is an Irishman. And he is believed to be the first player from Ireland to get a full scholarship. We've got I think it was Harry Lyles that wrote that piece on ESPN.com, wrote a tremendous piece. And then we're also going to have a piece on College Game Day Saturday morning about him. And as I was in the Epic Museum, which highly recommend if you're in Dublin, it's a story of Irish immigration with an E and the impact that they've had on the world in various disciplines, whether it's literature that we touched on earlier, politics, it deals back to the Troubles, and before that, the famine and all of those types of things. But there's also part of the museum that talks about Irish influence on sport. It's a very interactive museum, and as I was messing around with the table and touching the different pieces, to have videos played, learn something about Irish roots for various athletes. I touched American football, obviously, as quickly as I could. David Shanahan popped
He's
up
in the museum already.
It was in this great museum. Yeah. So I thought that was a cool thing. We've got a great piece on him on College Game Day Saturday morning too. And his story's fascinating. Reads like something out of a storybook, old school story, from the farm and the dad's pharmacy, and the whole thing is just it's really compelling piece. Highly recommend tuning in to Game Day to watch the piece, and certainly reading the piece that Harry wrote so brilliantly on ESPN.com.
I've read a lot of bios of college football players in all the years I've done this, as have you, Rece. I have never read this sentence in a bio. Continued to hone his punting skills during the COVID-19 pandemic by punting in solitude on his uncle's dairy farm in Southwest Ireland. So someone in the Georgia Tech SID office should take a bow. The Southwest Ireland part, but the story sounds like things that you would hear. And I love the old college football history books. There are a number of them, from the, some of the, you learn about the players who would go from school to school and get, $50 to play for this team. And the next week they'd play against the same team for someone else and get another $50 or $10 or whatever it was back then. Back then you would hear about guys coming off the farm and showing up. Nobody knew who they were, and making a place on the team. And Dave Revson, wrote a tremendous book. That they mock me about, because I bring that up all the time. A great punter from Wisconsin, who had Australian roots, I think. So it was a lot of that old school type stuff. There's an old school feel to the David Shanahan story coming and punting for the Yellow Jackets. Can I read one line from Harry's story? Harry Lyles wrote this great story on ESPN.com that's up there this week. Quote, Shanahan worked on his family's farm at his dad's pharmacy, took money he had previously saved from past birthdays, his first communion and confirmation, and used it all to move to Melbourne at the end of 2019 to go to Pro Kick to become a punter. So if that doesn't warm this South Boston resident's Catholic school educated heart, I don't know what would. If first communion money is the only time you hear about first communion money in college football is when they're making fun of a coach for having not spent his first communion money yet. So,
and I think it's really important for the loser of this game, whether it's Georgia Tech, whether it's Florida State, but particularly I think if it's Tech, to not let the trip, the early start, the going back to recover, even though they have time, they got a couple of road games coming up in September. All of this is going to sort of define the direction of their season. So whatever happens here has to be viewed for what it is, and that's one game. It's one of the 12. It can't be viewed as, okay, we set our sights, we're going to shock the world. We didn't. And then, come back, and then you go to Syracuse on the 7th of September, and you you catch a buzzsaw on the road, you go to Louisville in September, now all of a sudden you're in a hole. So it's going to be really incumbent on Georgia Tech. Whatever happens on Saturday afternoon here does not carry over that much. If they take the lessons they need from it, but it doesn't become something that spirals their season way too early. We've seen seasons go oddly after this. Northwestern and Nebraska, each of them a couple of years ago, oddly enough, having their seasons go. I was making the joke the rest of the season that Northwestern had not won in North America, that year after beating Nebraska, and then Nebraska went completely sideways, after blowing that game here.
I want to say they fired Scott Frost September 12th. Something like that. This is Pat Fitzgerald's last win as a coach. Was here.
Florida State, its troubles with the ACC. Now a new season starts. Here they go, new playoff format. Any change, impact, anything for this upcoming season on the horizon? I know it won't impact the players on the field. The last thing Patrick Payton's thinking about is, well, can I really get to this quarterback and bat down this pass while we're under the constraints and the straitened circumstances of the media contract? Can we get to the SEC or can I get to the quarterback? He's not worried about that. But just the entire vibe surrounding Florida State, what impact in the immediate future or near future do you anticipate, if any?
Sure. So we just passed the August 15th deadline, Rece. So if Florida State or Clemson or anyone was going to leave the ACC for the following year, so you would be saying, hey, we are not going to be in the ACC in 2025. You would have had to declare that August 15th of 2024. So that means they're locked in for the following season. I feel like the 26th season is in play where something could happen. And look, like, there's ongoing litigation from both Florida State and from Clemson. Typically, litigation gets settled in some way, right? The when and the hows of that, I don't think we're particularly close to yet. The February 1st television contract deadline and then the evolution of the CFP are the two mile markers we need to watch going forward in terms of maybe some movement. I think how the CFP forms is just going to inform those schools of how they're going to move forward, and then how the TV deal gets settled is going to shape the future of the ACC. Not settled, but how the option is decided upon, because I believe it's through 26-27 is what the TV contract is guaranteed, then with the option to go through 36. So if there is some type of settlement, it may be before February 1st. But then so much of this, Rece, comes back to, like, what's Carolina going to do? If those two are going to leave, how do you keep the other 15 locked in moving forward? How would that impact cost? How much would those schools pay in order to offset some of that cost? So there's big, high-end financial calculus happening, and I think the sides are in the early stages of feeling each other out. I get no sense that anything is imminent or likely, in the upcoming 2 months or so, but we'll see. These are it is fluid and it is complicated because of the legal side. If you just played out the legalities of this, I'd estimate at least 3 years, right? So we're sort of in the start of that slog, and concurrently, as the legal road is being paved, so is the footsies about settlement. So yes, but I do not think it will impact Patrick Payton getting any PBUs.
I want to hit it before we hit a couple of bigger picture things looking ahead to week one, things of that nature. One thing we haven't talked about with the Florida State Georgia Tech game is our I guess friend or friendly with the offensive coordinator at Florida State, Alex Atkins, is not on this trip, serving a suspension, which will lead me in a moment.
He's on the trip, Rece.
Oh, he's just not able to coach. He's suspended. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's the same. No, I just think it's the same purview Harbaugh was under. Remember, it's like midnight the night before. Whatever it was ever. That's my understanding of that as it goes right now, which is a huge difference between just being gone from the team. Because remember, both of Harbaugh's suspensions last year, the first three, and then the last three fell under that purview. It's a huge difference.
Well, yeah, but it's a little bit disappointing. I understand the difference in the home and the road games, but one of the joys of the early season last year was, what's Jim doing to watch the game today? Worked the chain gang for his son's game. I'll never forget the way he phrased watching the game with Sharon Moore, who also I think was serving a 1-game suspension.
The East Carolina game, yeah.
The East Carolina game, and the way Jim termed that Sharon figured out the peacock, as he referred to it, the streaming service in which the game was on. And then Jim went on to share part of his television streaming packages and informed us that he didn't have the peacock, but that Sharon figured out the peacock and that Sharon's wife made some lovely sandwiches, which, so I think it should be a rule, if a guy's suspended, that we need to know how he watches the game, and he needs to kind of be away from the team, so that it's kind of a bizarre story.
It will be actually interesting for Alex, because I don't know. I have not turned on my TV in my hotel room. I don't know how readily available ESPN is in Dublin.
It's not on mine. It's not here.
Yeah.
But
luckily he probably has the app, so I think he's going to be okay.
So let me get us back on track as we wrap up here. Our wonderful producer, Adrian, threw out a couple of burning questions. A couple caught my fancy, and I'll tell you why as we embark on this 12-team playoff year. And I think our loyal listeners and our loyal viewers on Game Day will forgive us, but we have found out through research and study that a lot of people don't understand how this 12-team playoff is going to work. Some don't even realize that the 12-team playoff is coming in, what it's going to be. So we trust that you'll forgive us that we're going to reiterate this throughout the season, both on the podcast, on the show, to try to get people prepared. And
if you're listening to this podcast like 41 minutes in, you better know there's a 12-team playoff.
Yeah, they know, but even working, here's a little question though that I thought was interesting, because my knee-jerk reaction was one thing, and the more I thought about it, I went the other way. One of the questions was, will we see controversy around the Group of Five champion getting a guaranteed college football playoff spot? And the example given is if, say, Liberty gets in over Oklahoma. Okay, well, my initial reaction to that was, well, no, because everybody, wants to emphasize conference champions. You want to give the little guy a chance, all of those things. I thought, and everybody knows the rules, and it is what it is. But as I thought about that for a minute, it'll probably be okay this year. But this is going to be one of those things that people aren't going to like. And it's going to be when I say people, I mean the powers that be. And they're not going to like the way it impacts the matchups most years, not every year. There will be years like when Cincinnati won the American and was deserving, and under this format would have gotten a bye. Then nobody's going to have an issue with that when the teams are good. But by definition, most years, hear me, listen to me now, hear me later, Group of Five listeners. Thank you. Most years, you're going to be given a spot in the playoff by achieving something significantly less than what the others have achieved, the other conference champions. And you can quibble over the difference between winning the Big Ten as opposed to the ACC or the Big 12. Go ahead. There's not that level of drop off from that to what many years, if not most years, will be achieved when you win a Group of Five conference title. So you're going to have a lesser team in. Right now, if I'm not mistaken, not that this is a be-all, end-all, the preseason poll, people look at it in different ways. It sort of generates interest. It's a little bit projection, a little bit of where you think teams are right now. But I don't think there's a Group of Five team in it right now. So you would have an unranked team taking the last playoff spot. People will think that's cool this year. They might think it's cool next year. At some point, they're going to go, wait, why? Why are you getting that for achieving that? So ultimately, not this year, I don't think. I mean, whoever gets squeezed, if it were Liberty over Oklahoma, but they're not going to like it, of course. By and large, this year, probably okay. As we go forward, not okay. And it's going to lead to some of the changes I've talked about, going to 16, probably a condensation of the power leagues and who's actually in this thing.
The whole enterprise is sort of being held together with some fragility, right? Like it's all a tepid truce to keeping this whole 130 and what are we 131 now 132 race under the same circuit.
And they were 130 133, aren't we? 133 or
Okay, yeah, I think
134, maybe
welcome to
134
the
this
circus,
year.
Kennesaw.
Yeah, yeah.
But the difference between Georgia and Kennesaw State is just pretty significant. So
Mhm.
I am happy. Like again, we don't root for teams or anything like that, but like it's okay if we sit here and say I liked the Pac-12. I just kind of liked that it
Sure,
existed and had history and everything. So I like the fact that the enterprise is all under one roof, and I like the fact that there is access for teams 65 and above for one of them to have a shot. I think it's good for the sport. I think it's good for storylines. I think it's good for just injections of energy. I think it's germane to sort of the spirit of college sports. I do wonder, as we go through this 2 years of 12 and then expected 14 after that, Rece, like how long that courtesy is granted, because the gap between these power leagues and everybody else is growing and growing and growing. If you're the American, you get $7 million in media money estimated a year. And if you're in the Big Ten, that number's like closer to mid 50s, 60 million right now. So it's like you're 1/10 of that. And as we have rev share, and as the financial realities codify, to use the favorite new college athletics buzzword, like those teams are just not going to be as competitive as they maybe have been in the past. So I am grateful that access point is there, just because I think it's fun and it's different, and it'll be cool that Boise's playing a game at 1 a.m. that impacts that. But I also think it'll be very interesting that the 5 seed in theory has some advantages going into the playoff, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have a home game. You're going to,
Short layoff.
Team you're probably a double-digit favorite against.
Knock some rust off before you face the 4. A lot, I mean, you could now. The flip side of that is you could turn, an important player could turn an ankle for, heaven forbid.
Or somebody runs the Statue of Liberty and beats you, and then
But you know what? That's an example, though, Pete, of teams that I think we won't mind seeing. Those great Boise State teams people won't mind that. It'll be, and there's no way to tell when those years will come and when they won't. There will be some years when the Group of 5 team might be ranked 21st, but it's because of strength of schedule, it's because they lost this game or that game. But you watch them play and you go, okay. There's not much difference between them and, whoever was 12, not much difference at all. And we like seeing them, but there are going to be some years where they're going to be completely overmatched. I mean, that's that's the history of college football.
Well, look at Liberty against Oregon last year.
Right. Exactly.
And we'll see Boise go to Oregon in week 2. And we say Boise because they're the favorite to win the Mountain West. It could be App State. It could be Toledo. It could be
Texas State. Or Memphis.
Could be Texas State. Memphis is obviously a very popular pick. They're very talented right now. Some people like Tulane. UTSA has been in that conversation. But I just think us having this conversation about those teams is just indicative of why I like that access point. But you can see Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti sitting around being like, "Wait a minute, we're just giving one to now."
For sure, that's what I'm talking about. This is what I mean.
To Sankey's credit, he has, been an advocate for keeping everything under the same tent here. And, now I think he got a little bit unfairly portrayed as Darth Vader because he wants to expand the tournament last year. Like there's nothing. I mean, I guess there could be lawsuits or something. There's nothing making the leaders give access to those teams. But we're seeing a financial separation that's so significant that, this is my opinion, I can't help but see that it won't lead to an actual separation of some kind, right?
It's going to, I mean, this is going to happen.
Is this 13 years? I don't know the answer to that, Rece, but it is headed, it is headed that way. There's too much private equity chatter. Now, again, how will it happen? I don't know. Those TV contracts are a tricky wicket to untangle. So I don't think this is imminent, as in soon, but it does feel like there's an aura of inevitability about it at some point.
Correct. I mean, I don't know either. If I had to guess, I would say if you were saying set the over under at 4.5 years before something, I would take the over, but I'd probably take the under of 9.5. Something like that. And we've seen, for years, college football has changed at a glacial pace. It's been like turning a battleship as opposed to a speedboat. But then all of a sudden, the last 2 or 3 years, some things have turned on a dime. And so because of that, my prediction of the time frame when this might happen could be way off. But the most important thing is that the time frame counting down to the start of the season is now dwindling and finite, and we know when it starts. The season starts at 9 a.m. Eastern time, 2 in Dublin, with the start of College Game Day. We'll lead you right in to Florida State and Georgia Tech, which is just a tremendous way to start a college football season. An amazing slate of games through the season, not going to mislead people. The slate outside of the Seminoles and the Yellow Jackets on week 0, not so great. But, otherwise, or not compelling, although we'll all be watching those games anyway. But once week 1 gets here, this season, going to be phenomenal. Can't wait to get Game Day started. Nick Saban's in Ireland for College Game Day. It's a new chapter for the College Game Day family. We're excited about that and the different opportunities that's going to bring us. McAfee will be here soon. I think he's on his way. I think he's doing his show from a pub here downtown, and then he'll be back. It's going to be a great season, Pete. Look forward to working with you and hanging out with you both on the podcast and for the show all year. It's going to be really compelling theater to watch the new configurations of the leagues compete, knowing that they're going for expanded playoff spots. So many storylines there, none of which, under any circumstances, barring a 6-6 season, should include Ryan Day and the term hot seat. That will get me angry if that starts coming up. That's nonsense. Anyway,
he has the best winning percentage in college football.
It's the dumbest thing ever. But he's not going to have to worry about it because they're going to win the Big Ten and go to the playoff anyway. So,
can I close by asking our listeners, Rece, if there is a local pub here in Dublin that will be showing the SMU Nevada game at 1 a.m. I am not going to stay up and watch Delaware State Hawaii at 5 a.m. But I think Stanford Steve, I don't want to speak for him, he would probably join me at a local establishment that gets the fine CBS Sports Network to watch the Wolfpack host SMU. I'm in.
Yeah.
So any local listeners with any local knowledge that can tell me where to go, there's a very good chance Stanford Steve and I will show up. And I'm speaking completely for him without asking. But I know Stanford.
Well, he'll
he's going to watch
it.
that game. Yes.
That's the debut. Is that not the debut of Jeff Choate? Is that right?
Jeff Choate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Choate. Savion Red came with him at tailback from Texas. And my favorite, I might talk about him. I'm going to try to talk about him on Game Day, is Keaton Crawford, best special teams player in the country last year. Get drafted just for his special teams is at Nevada. Blocked a kick in Red River last year. So if you don't get excited for Keaton Crawford on week 0, I don't know. You probably shouldn't be listening to this podcast 49 minutes in.
Here's something. SMU's done an unbelievable job raising money since they're not getting the full media share or any media share for several years from the ACC. But there are challenges to overcome on the field, and I'll leave you with one more or a couple of little nuggets about SMU that won't come into play against Nevada, but will come into play as they have their ACC schedule, and then they'll play BYU, Big 12, TCU, Big 12 later on as well. They are 1-9 in their last 10 games against Power 4, then Power 5 opponents. And last year they faced 3 teams in those conferences, and they scored 11, 17, and 14 against Boston College in bowl game. So there is a lot there. There's a little there is chatter that SMU sleeper, maybe the one team moving into these power leagues that could contend early, and I'd be happy enough if that's the case. But there's some recent history to overcome there. Nuggets. It shows we've got a lot of information, and it's time to start playing so that we can put some of this into action and see what was real and what was not. Thanks for listening to the College Game Day podcast from Dublin. Thamel split the G. He'll probably do it again before his trip here to Ireland is over. We encourage you to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, or download wherever you prefer to listen to your podcast.